now go to the regular agenda item number 4. And the first item is A, the department with respect to Saving Innocence and Journey Out project. And the presentation will be by Deputy Chief Chris Pritchard and I believe Deputy Chief Alan Hamilton. Madam Secretary, can you please bring them forward?
Yes, good morning, Commissioners and Chief. This morning, subject matter experts from Detective Bureau, the Bureau, HTTFs, and community advocacy organizations are going to be discussing the critical issue of human trafficking and the collective response to it in Los Angeles. First is Detective Mario Gallegos. He has been the department's subject matter expert on human trafficking, and he serves as the department's primary coordinator to the Bureau Human Trafficking Task Force operations, the prosecutorial agencies, and the community-based organizational resource responders and providers to ensure an effective and coordinated effort. He has held this position for about 6 years. He is clearly an expert in this area, and he is now going to be providing you with an overview of human trafficking issues and efforts in Los Angeles and how we coordinate the responses. Detective Gallegos, are you on?
Do we have Detective Gallegos?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for this time. My name is Mario Gallegos. I'm the detective supervisor assigned to DSVD. I've been designated as a human trafficking coordinator for the city, and I'm proud to do that. I just want to give you an explanation. Currently, I wear many hats. The crime of human trafficking, labor trafficking is simply defined as modern day slavery and involves the use of force, fraud, coercion upon a victim in order to have them commit some type of sex act or labor act. The crime of human trafficking affects our community at many different levels, and for those reasons, I liaison closely with several advocacy groups, DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, Department of Probation, and many other law enforcement agencies within our county and within our state. I hold many relationships. I work closely with many advocacy groups. Part of my duties are to partner with them regarding training events. I troubleshoot with them regarding active investigations when they are out there supporting victims and working closely with our officers. I also provide the advocacy groups with insight regarding our law enforcement protocols and best practices. I also facilitate the transfer of information between investigators and our advocacy workers. I also work closely with the district attorney's office. I ensure that our LAPD investigations are properly conducted. I also partner with them during many training events, and I work with our vice officers regarding all of our filings for our cases. On a regular basis, I provide oversight at active investigations, at operations, to ensure that our investigations are thoroughly completed. I've partnered with the DA's office on many events to conduct human trafficking training all over the county and even out of state. On a regular basis, I'm in communication with the supervisor from the Human Sex Trafficking Section, District Attorney Theodore Swanson, and we speak on a daily basis regarding ongoing cases and how we can do a better job. One of my other partners I work closely with is the Department of Probation. Many of our victims of human trafficking are also currently being monitored by probation, and many of our suspects are also being monitored by probation. So I work closely with them to coordinate operations where we're recovering juveniles and operations where we're actually seeking out our trafficking suspects. I've done a lot of training with the probation officers in explaining to them and giving them information on how to observe and identify indicators of human trafficking on the victim side and on the suspect side. So I work closely with probation on a day-to-day basis. And finally, one of my other duties is also to work closely with the various task forces. Every county, LA County, Ventura County, San Bernardino, Orange County, they all have large human trafficking out task forces. And I work daily with them to making sure that we're all aware of current trends. Any suspects that are traveling in and out of our counties, we're always sharing information. And I'm always liaising between those agencies and our own vice units and our standing human trafficking task forces. I work with many different partners. I work with probation, DCFS, and our advocacy partners. It's my main duty now. I liaison operations. I liaison training events on a day-to-day basis. I really feel that in working with all these many entities, that's the best way that we can serve each other, is having an open line of communication. I've learned in the last 6 years that collaborating and partnering with these many agencies is the best way that we can confront this crime. I just wanted to give you guys a snapshot of my current duties, my current mission in working with many different entities. Thank you for your time.
Commissioners, would you like to ask questions individually or save them for the end?
Let's save them for the end.
Great, sir. Okay, so at the field level, the human trafficking task force operations are guided by the Bureau Vice coordinators. So this morning, you will be hearing from Lieutenant Mark Evans out of Operations Valley Bureau, and also Lieutenant Robin Richards, who runs the operations out of Operations South Bureau. So first up, Mark, please go ahead with your overview.
I'd like to open up briefly, Chief, and just talk about the OVB effort, and then I'll hand it over to Lieutenant Evans. Our Human Trafficking Task Force was created to address the blight and crime associated with prostitution activity along the Sepulveda Boulevard corridor between Victory Boulevard and Nordhoff Street, which has been a historical area of concern in the San Fernando Valley. The creation of the unit also addressed significant public outcry from those that lived in the area, and that was a historical outcry in an effort to get the problem resolved, or at the minimum greatly minimized. So in 2015-16, Council District 6 was receiving roughly 100 complaints a month regarding street walking, prostitution activity, and human trafficking along the corridor. And Lieutenant Evans was given the mandate to come in and make a change in that situation. With that in mind, we ensured that the 3 E's were implemented. We educated the public. We did some engineering and crime prevention through environmental design to make it tougher for those individuals to ply their trade along the Sepulveda corridor. And then, of course, we came in with an enforcement component that addressed directly the recidivist activity and the human trafficking that was going on along the corridor that was specifically targeted at the pimping activity, where basically young females were brought in on what's called the circuit, and Lieutenant Evans will elaborate on that, and they were brought through the area to ply their trade and to commit acts of street walking prostitution. We launched the tip line by email that we were using, that we use here in the Valley, to gain information from the community and interact directly with the community. And that has proven to be a very efficient and effective tool where we get real-time information when there's activity on the boulevard that we may not be aware of. And just briefly, I'm going to give big kudos to Lieutenant Evans, who is a nationally renowned expert on human trafficking and has provided education throughout the world in human trafficking. He is very familiar with the different modes and methods used by human traffickers in the Los Angeles area, the Southern California area, and mainly throughout the Western United States of America. So, it's always great for us to have these types of experts in-house that provide training and coordinate with all of the other entities, both inside and outside of the department, including our federal partners. And Lieutenant Evans has been doing a fabulous job out here in the Valley over the last few years. I'm going to hand it over to Lieutenant Evans to give some of the specifics and talk about some of the non-governmental organizations, including Journey Out, that we work closely with. Mark?
Thank you. As we launched the Human Trafficking Task Force a number of years ago, and we wound up coming into 2021, our partnerships with Journey Out has been firm and strong. And what we do is we refer actually refer all of the girls that we have contact with to Journey Out. Once those victims or survivors go to Journey Out, we no longer follow that process. That's outside of our jurisdiction, so to speak. So we let Journey Out do what Journey Out does. But I can say they've been extremely helpful and supportive in providing resources to our victims, especially when they become advocates, take them to court, and encouraging them to face their accusers. In 2021, in spite of COVID and being redeployed due to various protests and things like that, we were able to arrest 23 human trafficking suspects, and we had 23 filings. So we have a 100% filing rate there. The way we do our operations is a little bit unique, and sometimes we can be criticized because we're not rescuing as many people as some might think we should. But the reason we do the operation the way we do, wherein we focus on the human traffickers and letting them approach and recruit our undercover officers, that ends up generating a lot of pandering arrests. And then those pandering arrests will culminate into human trafficking arrests from time to time as we do follow-ups and we locate other victims. We had 47 pandering arrests, and we also, on that, only one was filed. So I guess that gives about a 97.8% filing rate, and our conviction rates are equally as high because we learned the way we needed to operate. And now we try to videotape everything, and we just let the jurors and the filing DAs just watch what happened instead of having them read a big comprehensive report and then make a decision on that. So it's much more compelling in the way we've raised the bar and the way we work. With that said, we rescued one adult and one juvenile. And then I look at it as we also prevented more than 47 others from becoming victims by us pursuing the traffickers that are in the area all the time. They do surveillance and counter surveillance on our operations, and so we know that they're out there extensively. In lieu of not just doing human trafficking operations, but my mandate was to also help clean up the Sepulveda corridor. So we look at crime trends, and we look at how we can do our undercover operations in areas that are higher in crime, or even our high traffic collision areas, our A and K traffic areas. And while doing that, we were able to issue 1,690 traffic citations. We arrested 374 Johns. And something I'm personally proud of is we arrested 34 women. And in decades past, we can go back 30 years, we've tried to arrest our way out of this problem by arresting the women, which we know are the victims, oftentimes in this case, in this type of crime. And so we've arrested 34, which is a humongous reduction, because in the years past, it would be as many as 300-400. So I like the paradigm shift that we're seeing. And I could probably talk for hours longer, but I'll leave it at that unless someone has a specific question for me.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. I'm going to move this over very quickly at Operation South Bureau and Deputy Chief Gerald Woodyard, if you have any comments. Not seeing Deputy Chief Woodyard. Robin Richards, can you come on up? Okay, while we're waiting for them, we've also invited commissioners, 3 advocate organizations that provide services to the individuals. Once we come into contact with them. First, we've invited Mr. Dave Cox. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Zoe International. that provides those services. Along with him, Mr. Alan Smythe, he is the Executive Director of Saving Innocence. And last, we have Ms. Tika Thornton. She is the lead case manager for Journey Out. I'm sure that you're familiar with all of these agencies as we've been working with them for years. So seeing Deputy Chief Woodyard come up, Gerald, do you have any opening comments quickly?
Yes, just really quickly. Good morning, Chief Moore. Good morning, Commissioner Briggs and distinguished board. I have here with me Lieutenant Robin Richards and Sergeant Yolanda Haggerty. They are the subject matter experts. Human trafficking is obviously going to be a focus in South Bureau, but I will pass it on to Sergeant Haggerty for specifics.
Lieutenant, if you want to talk about our unit and the focus.
Good morning to the panel. I'm Lieutenant Robin Richards, and I'm the Bureau Vice and Human Trafficking Coordinator for Sub Bureau. Like the Valley, we have a track in Sub Bureau, which is Figueroa Street. I'm sure most people are familiar with. I'm hearing the feedback. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. Our track here is Figueroa Street in Sub Bureau, which we have seen tremendous prostitution, human trafficking activities. We have come up with a plan, which we have 1 supervisor and 7 officers tackling the plan along with their vice officers to address the problem in Figueroa Street. It's been very, very challenging, but with the efforts we have put in, we have made some significant progress over the last 3 years. And to get specifics into some of those processes that we've made, I'll have Sergeant Macias Haggerty speak to those specifically.
Good morning and thank you. I've had the pleasure of supervising the South Bureau of Human Trafficking Task Force for 4 years. And since then, I've seen a lot of changes. We had, when I started, 3 officers that were on loan, and now we have 7 permanently assigned investigators. So we take the positions very seriously. We take the crime very seriously. In South Bureau, my unit alone has made over 200 arrests, prostitution arrests. 26 of those arrests have been human trafficking. So our filing status is a majority of our cases get filed. When they're not, they're usually rejected for further information. These cases are very long and lengthy. They require a lot of corroborating evidence, which my unit, their investigators were essentially a detective table, but we're also vice operators. We've done 19 operations along Figueroa. Our corridor, our prostitution track goes from Gage all the way down to Imperial. And the benefit of having investigators / vice operators is that we can go out and generate investigations from the ground up. We contacted over 70 females, majority minors. CSEX, our commercially sexually exploited children, have been a focus of ours because their resources, reaching out to Saving Innocence and our NGOs is very important so that we kind of stop and interrupt a lot of the trauma that's they're experiencing. I've seen personally trafficking changes. The operators now can monitor victims from afar. Technology has advanced and it's making it more difficult as investigators to make those arrests. So it does require a lot of intensive legwork, follow-up investigations. Our unit or my unit has also helped with enforcement. A lot of the pet activity along Figueroa has made life challenging for the community within the corridor. And like I said, from Gage to Imperial. I'm excited about some of our equipment that we received from a grant, the Police Foundation. We've obtained a Cellbrite machine, which allows us to data extract information a lot quicker, handles lifelines, the cell phones back to victims. And we also have a GPS tracker so that we can monitor the activities of some of these habitual offenders. Social media has made it very challenging these days. Figueroa can be advertised by a lot of people along the track. So not only do we have a homegrown problem with our minors and our vulnerable teenagers here in Los Angeles, but we're also getting a lot from Northern California and outside of the state. So I'm looking forward to maybe parlaying the human trafficking, anti-human trafficking campaigns that are coming up during the Super Bowl, and hopefully establishing some kind of education campaign from here on out with different angles, the hotels, as well as law enforcement and everybody else who can take part in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that overview, and we're going to quickly turn to for their comments the first of three advocates. Mr. Dave Cox, welcome, and can you please provide an overview of generally what your organization provides during an HTTF operation?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for the time and even just the update for human trafficking in the city. So my name is Dave Cox. I serve as the COO for Zoe International. And at Zoe, we focus on child trafficking, and we've been doing that since 2002. We work internationally in 5 nations. On the global stage, I can say LA has really been a respected leader in this fight. Our State Department told us that people around the world watch Los Angeles because our city is the most innovative in combating child trafficking. It's done a lot of things, just providing dedicated funding for specialized units to investigate, rescue, prosecute. It's really proven effective. We do a lot of multi-agency collaboration in LA that's been really effective. One of the most brilliant ideas in LA is the first responder protocol, which provides advocates. So when law enforcement recovers a child, advocates are on scene within 90 minutes, providing crisis response to minors and to support law enforcement, social workers, probation officers, or if DCFS identifies a child in the system that have been trafficked, they assign an advocate. And it's really provided a missing gap that's increased the success of youth, and they take advantage of all the services the city provides, and it really helps get them set on a new trajectory. So last year at Zoe International, we served over 100 youth through advocacy. I'll tell you a quick story. One young child who had grown up in the system, they had no safe adult to care for her. And she told us all she was good for was to be sold for sex. That was her mentality. And she was being sold night after night. She was on the streets of LA, out of motels, out of homes of married men by dangerous men. She's bright, strong, loving, smart, funny girl. Though she really tried to resist at first, even just contact with her advocate. The advocate stayed consistent, called day after day, and that advocate fought for relationship with her. The advocate didn't react negatively to her efforts to push her away, which really helped bridge this gap of distrust of the system and built relationship there. And after months of building relationship with her and the support of everyone on her team, she began to post empowering messages on social media instead of sexual photos of herself. She stopped calling herself a prostitute. She identified with stories of other survivors she was meeting who shared their story with her and said that she was a survivor too. And she in fact started to dream about life off the streets and simply just being a child again. And with the support of law enforcement, the trafficker was prosecuted and sentenced to prison. So it shows how the city can come together and work well. There's so many more stories. Kids 12 years old, 14, 15 years old. At Zoe, we also took a step to meet a missing gap in the care of these kids. Our organization opened a specialized home for CSEC youth this past year, an SDRTP, and it provides specialized care for youth who've been trafficked. It's a 50-acre campus. It's the first of its kind in LA, and it provides essential care for these girls who've been trafficked, just like the girl I mentioned before. And they have a place to rest, heal, and be children again. It's a trauma-informed home, and they get a lot of individualized attention. So we have to say this, LA is really innovating. It's having great success. We do face challenges. Human trafficking is not slowing down. COVID did not slow it down. In fact, it's likely increasing. That's what we're hearing on the street. Another challenge is that the thin blue line, it's just thin. It's very thin. LAPD is doing fantastic work, but staffing, it's just challenging, obviously, and specialized units are affected as well, which hurts the fight. And a third concern is there's discussions in human trafficking of decriminalizing prostitution or even loitering for prostitution, like SB 357. So for many of us in the fight, we are concerned of decriminalization, that it would only increase human trafficking and take away key tools for law enforcement to be able to investigate and identify victims. So despite those challenges, LA is doing great work, and we want to just say we salute you, our law enforcement partners in the fight. Thank you, commissioners, for your interest in the effort, and we can't do it without you, and we need you, and the children of the city, they need you.
Thank you, Dave. And from Saving Innocence, Mr. Alan Smith.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. As said, my name is Alan Smith. I'm the Executive Director for Saving Innocence, and I want to thank you for all the work that you all do. It's critical that we work together, and we appreciate it. Saving Innocence has enjoyed a positive, fruitful, collaborative relationship with the LAPD for the benefit of commercially sexually exploited children for over 10 years. And we have loved our partnership with the LAPD throughout that time. Mario Gallegos, we heard from earlier, has been one of the many all-stars that we've worked closely with during that time. Having said all of that, I can't sign off until I relay an urgent message to you all. And the urgent message is this: the crime of human trafficking, with an emphasis on child trafficking, is increasing, not decreasing. All of the factors which create vulnerable people and broken men, who are predominantly the buyers, they've been exacerbated by the global pandemic. We're talking about the modern day slavery, where one person is asserting ownership over another person, and they are forcing them to do the most demeaning, degrading, inappropriately egregious, and oftentimes very dangerous things imaginable. A typical victim of child trafficking, of sex trafficking, is literally raped 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 times or more every single day, oftentimes in a violent manner. We recently received the youngest child we've ever taken care of at 7 years old, a tender 7 years old at the time when we received her. Our staff at Saving Innocence is struggling right now, to be honest. We recently received the news that 2 of our recently former clients were murdered. This comes right on the heels of the news that one of our kids was found on the side of the freeway, murdered, which came right on the heels of one of our clients being found at a bus stop. And she was found in such a way that would tell us that she experienced severe sexual assault right up until the end. Last spring, we held a memorial service for a dozen of the kids that have recently passed that we've been supporting. I would love to have a conversation with whoever it was that deemed human trafficking as a non-violent crime, because they are sorely and tragically mistaken. I have to be honest with you all. I come here with some passion, but with a little bit of frustration. I was honored to address this group 2 years ago, which I did. And a number of the members and the people on the screen were passionately engaged with the conversation and the topic. And I even saw a tear or two in someone's eyes. And things were said like, we cannot back down at all from our enforcement, investigations, prosecutions of trafficking. I felt very hopeful. And then really soon after that, one of the dedicated child trafficking units was disbanded, was dispersed. Now, I'm not looking at what you're looking at. I'm not looking at your budget concerns. I heard earlier the personnel concerns. You all have a massive job to do. Thank you for doing it well. But I'm hoping, and the other advocates here are hoping, that you'll see some of what we see and that maybe you're not seeing. And so what I have to say to you, friends and colleagues, we can't do less of anti-trafficking work. We must do more. All of us must do more. Every one of us has to dig deep and figure out a way to do more anti-trafficking work. The lives of the kids are literally hanging in the balance. The great Nelson Mandela put it perfectly when he said, there's no keener revelation to a society's soul than in the way at which it treats its children. The great Mandela is somehow equating the condition of our soul with how we treat children and how we protect children. A trafficking survivor once said to me that in the middle of her trauma, when she had lost all hope, she said, I could no longer fight for myself. I needed someone to fight for me. Well, we have to do more. No budget is too big to add to this fight. No amount of personnel is too many to add to this fight. Our children's lives depend upon it. The condition of our very soul, says Nelson Mandela, will be defined by it. This time in history, right here, right now, is a defining moment. And I hope and I pray as a society, as a humanity, that we'll be found equal to the task. So let's collectively do more. And that's not to minimize the great work. I absolutely agree with everything Dave Cox just said. There's a wonderful, innovative partnership in Los Angeles, but Los Angeles is massive and this problem is massive and it's not going away anytime soon. Thank you for all of your commitment and your effort. And we at Saving Innocence are proud to be counted among you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And last but certainly not least, from Journey Out to provide that perspective is Ms. Tika Thornton.
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Tika Thornton. I am the lead crisis response case manager at Journey Out. What we do is we provide whole help for the client. Law enforcement usually contacts us when they have a victim. We will answer the call, provide a basic hygiene, food, and shelter for the victim. What we also do is we have a program called Beacon, which is a pre-diversion filing program that we are piloting in the West Bureau area, which is lowering the, which is causing harm reduction for victims of human trafficking and those engaging in sex work. And what that does is it basically just plants the seed that there is help out there, that we are here not to treat them as criminals, but to treat them as people that have limited opportunities in life. And we are there to let them know what resources, what tools and what opportunities are out there, as well as offer them support in that journey. It has been my pleasure to work with law enforcement, with OVB, with West Bureau and South Bureau, as a survivor, as well as a service provider. I was a victim of human trafficking starting at the age of 12, up until the age of 18 in Los Angeles in the early 90s. My interaction with law enforcement in the 90s is much different than what my interaction with them is now. I can be very honest with that. There has been so much training. There has been so much accountability in the vice bureaus that I have been working with. And so I would like to thank the Chief Moore. I'd like to thank all of the lieutenants, the sergeants, and the officers that allow us as a nonprofit organization coming in to train them, to create reform from the inside. And also, if a lot of people would understand what these people, how they look when they first get arrested or detained, to how they look when they come into our organization and are part of our prostitution diversion program. The city attorney's office has done a great job spearheading this effort, combining service providers, survivors with law enforcement and the city attorney's office to create a more humane approach in trying to figure out who is working in this environment, who is working in this job field, right? Because of choice or because of force, fraud, or coercion. So I like to thank the officers again for being so open to listening to us as service providers to do their job in a more humane way. to actually listen to us when we say that there is a problem, to come to court and support us, when there is a case involving a trafficker, to calling them, even on their days off, just to make sure that they're okay, or to do check-ins with them. A lot of what these officers do, the community is not aware of it. They don't see them in the efforts of them calling me at all times of the day. Is this person okay? Have they eaten? What could I do in order to make the situation better for them? I just like to, for the past 5 years, coming from South Central Los Angeles, as a Black woman, as someone that was pointed out as a criminal engaging in prostitution before human trafficking was a thing, and now they have gained my trust as people that really care, that really want to make a difference, and really are empathetic towards this population. I say thank you, and I am excited to see what is going to happen in future time to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thornton, and Commissioner Briggs. All of the presenters remain available for your questions.
Thank you, Chief Pitcher. At this time, I'm going to open it up to the other commissioners. Commissioner Decker, I see your mic is open.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Briggs. And I want to begin first by thanking all of the presenters today for your informed and compelling presentations. Particularly, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Mr. Cox, Mr. Smith, Ms. Thornton for the work you do every day. It is extraordinary, and the city is so fortunate to have you doing partnership with the LAPD and Lieutenant Evans, Sergeant Heckerty, Lieutenant Richards. My gratitude to each of you as well. I hope you do accept. I do have a few questions, and I think I'd like to hear from the department and the advocates on each of these issues. And Mr. Smith, I'll say the only thing I disagreed with you on is that it was last year you presented, not 2 years ago. But the presentations were equally compelling. And following that presentation, the commission did write a detailed letter to the city council asking for funding to be restored to all the units. So I'd like to hear from the department first. I'd like to understand the staffing cuts and or the restoration of some of that staffing that has taken place in the last year or two, and understand the staffing needs that perhaps are being unmet in the department today. And I'm not sure who should take that specific question, but perhaps each of the bureaus could address it, South Bureau and Valley Bureau.
Yes, this is the Chief Woodyard from South Bureau. I just got here about 2 weeks ago. I'm taking a close look at our divisional vice units, and I see some gaps and holes in them. I definitely want to make them whole, specifically in Southeast Division, 77th Division, because that's where the majority of the track, for lack of better words, Figueroa corridor is. And then making sure that Southwest is whole. South Harbor Division is down 1 officer, but the other commands, they're down several officers. But clearly, that's something that I'm tracking on, and hopefully I can make those vice units whole. As it relates to the Human Trafficking Task Force itself, we're down one investigator. So that's something that we're looking at as we speak.
And Chief Woodyard, I realize you're relatively new to or returned to South Bureau. Do you know where there are staffing cuts made in the last year or two, specifically in South Bureau, that haven't been restored, or that you were unable to restore as you're now looking over your staffing?
They're just vacancies that we're going to be asking to be filled once as a critical vacancy.
Okay, let me turn to Valley Bureau and hear from you on that issue.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Decker. So in Operations Valley Bureau, we have not had any positions specifically cut. However, we fill the positions as advanced pay grade opportunities become available, both upgrades and lateral transfers. Where we have seen an issue in Operations Valley Bureau with our Human Trafficking Task Force is we have no permanently assigned supervisor. So the most direct need would be for investigative support because we file a good number of cases directly with our people, and for supervisory support. In terms of the actual assigned investigators, people cycle in and out of those spots, and as they become available and they're advertised, we do fill those. And in addition, I have supplied as a developmental, for developmental purposes, officers who have expressed an interest in human trafficking. We have actually cycled them through on loans, and they take that training and that wealth of understanding back to patrol when they go back to patrol in order to provide that training to the other officers that are working in patrol. So that is one of the direct benefits of circulating through those loans. Having that permanent supervisory position though, and we're really only talking about one permanent supervisory position, having that would allow us to have some consistency and maintain our goals, our drive, and our direction in human trafficking. In terms of the overall vice units, we've had a great connection with the vice units, particularly Van Nuys and Mission, as they're the ones that primarily police the corridor. And we've also had councilmanic support through Council District 6 with overtime funds that we've used. And Lieutenant Evans can probably briefly talk about how those overtime funds are dispersed.
But one follow-up question, Chief Hamilton. I'm trying to understand a little bit of a disconnect I have. When I hear your report, it sounds like other than filling one permanent supervisor position, which I assume you're able to do, it doesn't sound like there's been dramatic cuts to the human trafficking team in your division. Is that correct? In your bureau?
The positions have not been cut. That is correct, ma'am. We have been able to loan people in those positions. The
So
positions
I
remain.
know enough of the city budget to be dangerous. So I understand the positions haven't been cut, but have they been funded or no?
They have not been funded consistently because they go through the cycle of getting an advanced pay grade authority. As soon as we get those authorities, we fill those spots.
Understood.
Commissioner, I might be able to help on this as well.
Thank
So
you.
South Bureau and Valley Bureau have, from their own existing staffing that were not funded by budgetary by the city, established these units and it began in South Bureau, extended to Valley Bureau, and then Central Bureau and West Bureau have mustered from existing vice units a human trafficking task force outreach. It's been it has not been funded. These positions have not been authorized or funded. For instance, a supervisor, these vice personnel. Essentially, the department continues to harvest resources from patrol functions in order to staff these functions. Now, the one difference was that the council did fund $1.5 million in overtime monies that have been distributed amongst the 4 geographic bureaus so that they can augment staffing, typically vice officers, to conduct human trafficking outreach and engagement, these types of, and working with our partners. And I share with you my thanks for Mr. Cox, Mr. Smith, Ms. Thornton for their partnership and collaboration. But to the underlying issue, what this commission petitioned for, which was to formally establish by a table of organization full-time dedicated staffing in a human trafficking task force arena, not just in the 4 geographic bureaus, but also in Detective Support and Vice Division, which previously had a separate squad of personnel. When we were reduced more than 600 positions, these were a number of the specialized resources across the city needed to be downsized or disbanded in order to maintain essential uniform resources and our geographic patrol stations. So the department recognizes and I support the investigation of this. It's a terrible toll, human slavery, the disgusting abuse that occurs in our community. And this is a part of the solution, is what you're saying here today. But to your underlying point, we are essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul, realigning resources on a as we go basis in order to support the overarching efforts of human trafficking within the geographic, within the 4 geographic commands. And then for DSVD, they've only recently reestablished a point of liaison for human trafficking to oversee this efforts across the entire department. Again, a command that was substantially downsized in an effort to adjust to the downsized deployment.
Thank you, Chief. I think I understand now that due to budget cuts, a lot of specialized units were eliminated. However, the department is making every effort, but by doing to fill those positions and address this crime and assist victims, but nevertheless, to do that, it's effectively taking people off patrol. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, and the budget request, even for that was just recently approved for next year, the budget instructions that the department received was not to restore these type of positions because of the limits of funding that the city has available for services that it has presently has sufficient staffing to fund. So that's why we focused on the training augmentation. This detail, Hope detail, sexual assault investigations at the robbery homicide level, these are all specialized resources that have been substantially scaled back or eliminated and decentralized, if you will, to the geographic areas in an effort to combat, to deal with these the shortage of personnel.
And I wonder then, is there a way to quantify or understand what work is not getting done? I understand you're trying to address all the issues using current resources, but there must be work that's not getting done, and I'd like to understand that in a little more detail.
Well, I'll leave that to the 4 geographic bureaus, except to say that there's no free lunch. If there's people who are dedicated to this function as a full-time committed assignment, then they're not distracted by other responsibilities and obligations. For instance, vice units across the city have a multitude of pulls on them, other than just human trafficking. The misuse of ABC locations, gambling, other types of conduct that the vice investigations are charged with, problem-solving efforts that deal with centers that are committing acts of violence. We see locations that serve as if you will, magnets for violent crime. And so vice units are charged with those type of a multitude of activities. What we had previously, 5 years ago or 4 years ago, were a more committed, dedicated set of resources for this important area of our work.
Thank you, Chief.
Now it's more shared.
Understood. Let me take it from the perspective of the advocacy groups and what you're seeing on the street. I think it'd be helpful to hear your perspective of the impact of the budget cuts that have happened and not having dedicated teams. If you would like to share, I see Mr. Smith open the mic. Oh, and Mr. Cox, you too.
Go ahead, Dave.
You go first, Alan, or you want to jump in?
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, like the chief was saying, you know, it's the challenge has been when you had DSVD, you have Detective Gallegos, and he's phenomenal. And there's an incredible team that was working out of DSVD of dedicated personnel that could just focus on this. Any child trafficking investigations were being run out of that department citywide, and they did phenomenal work. A lot of amazing prosecutions and success. But when that had to disband as the reductions had to take place, and that gets divvied out to the individual vice units throughout the city and some of the bureau human trafficking units, they're just limited time and resource. So what we would see on the ground would be there's not a full ability to follow up on potential leads, missing children, just investigative leads that could be run, not out of a lack of willingness. There literally is just not time or manpower for that any longer. So the impact of personnel, there's just a reduction of time on the amount of investigative work available with officers to do it. And these type of investigations are definitely intensive, and they require a level of expertise. And so the advantage of having dedicated personnel, like many people on the screen, like Lieutenant Evans, he's there too, but just having that level of expertise really aids. But I think we're just down to a point where even divisional vice units, they're not even fully staffed themselves, and they have got a whole other caseload. So it is challenging to do basic follow-up without some more dedicated personnel.
I would agree with everything Dave just said. We see all those things. We definitely see a frustration level on some of the law enforcement, both LAPD and some of our sheriff department friends that are feeling a little bit discouraged by the budget and all these things we're talking about now. And I guess I want to sort of shoot a flare in the sky here. The problem is bad now, but based on all the things that are happening in our society, the governor right now is looking about ready to sign. He may have already, and it's being challenged in some way. There's legislations that are coming that are going to proliferate this problem, is going to be the end result. And with the open border on the southern part of our country, more and more people are being trafficked in, and we're going to start seeing them in greater numbers than ever before. So with the decriminalization effort that Dave Cox mentioned when he spoke of, that's a real pressure that will be disastrous for the victims of our city. If that fully happens, a full decriminalization will be disastrous, and particularly for children, because the demand will go up, the market will increase, and the traffickers are going to go find the vulnerable ones to fill that market in a business term. And those are children, those are vulnerable children. So it's not just that we have to solve the problems of today. There's going to be an explosion 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Starting today, it's going to be a gradual increase, not to mention this big, beautiful stadium in Inglewood. We're working hard to partner with everybody around the Super Bowl, but that big, beautiful stadium is going to be hosting all kinds of major events. And LA is scheduled to have the Olympics in a few years and the World Cup. And so these major events are coming. And the societal pressures of what's happening with the decriminalization and other things that are happening legislatively are going to cause this problem to double or triple or even more. So thank you for addressing the needs now, but let's be aware that it's getting worse if we don't act strongly immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Thornton, I see you opened your mic, ma'am.
Yes, there's a huge need over on the Figueroa corridor. That is where a lot of the trafficking issue is going on. Unfortunately, South Bureau does not have the manpower, understanding that this is a high crime area. There's a lot of things that are going on at the time, and so a lot of the efforts that have been put out far as operations are not really as I'm trying to use the correct word, but there needs to be more people put on staff in the South Bureau. 77th is swamped with all kinds of crime that's coming into that area, and the efforts for helping this community is there, but they're only could do so much with the amount of manpower that they have. I really hope that in the future we can have a more sound vice units, more investigators in that area, because where in some bureaus it's 3 cops to one girl, or should I say 3 girls to 1 cop. In this area, it's 12, 15, girls to one cop. And it's really hard to have operations done in a safe way, not just for the girls, but for law enforcement and for the community as well. So I just really feel that more efforts need to go into the South Bureau to help this population.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton and Mr. Cox and Mr. Smith for your candor. It's very important that we hear what you're facing, what you're seeing on the ground in reality. So I do appreciate that. Detective Gallegos, I do apologize. I left you off my list of thanks earlier, and I didn't intend to do that. I apologize. I have one more question, and I'll turn it back to Commissioner Briggs. And perhaps, Detective, this might be one you will be fielding. I've done a lot of reading on this topic. a number of reports that have been issued by the federal government, state, and community organizations. And one thread I see through many of them is not just what was talked about today, the proliferation and concern for the future, but a lot of the crime has migrated online, particularly during the pandemic, and it's expected that it will stay there. I'd like to have a better sense of how the department feels it is positioned to deal with all of these, many of these crimes going online, which can present its own challenges in terms of training and technology. I wonder, Detective, if you can address that, or if one of your colleagues is better positioned to address it.
I'm sure I can speak on, when I did oversee the DSVD unit, we did see during 2020 and 2021, we did see a big spike in the cyber tips that were coming in. A lot of those were being either we were vetting them and we were sending them to ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. They were handling some of those, and then we were handling some that fell into either the commercial sex work crimes or even just defined as human trafficking investigations. Easily, we saw a big increase due to the fact that a lot of the schools had the children at home online. So that opened up the internet to all of our predators. So we did see a big increase in that. One of the things that we were doing is we were vetting the tips. I had roughly 6 to 7 investigators at the time. We were handling easily 10 to 15 tips a month. We were trying to track down, victims, suspects, and work each tip up. Now all of our cyber tips that come into the city of LA, specifically when they're tabbed as human trafficking tips, they are vetted through Crime Stoppers. They're then vetted down into each division, and they find their way to the vice unit. Typically, if the crime tip is logged as a human trafficking or a prostitution investigation, it finds its way to the vice sergeant, and then the vice sergeant will then assign that tip to one of his investigators, and they will follow it up. That's the way that we're handling crime tips now, especially cyber tips. That's where we saw the biggest increase in 2021. A lot of it came from the online schooling that was occurring.
Thank you for that description. And it doesn't sound as efficient as the prior system in addressing human trafficking victims. Is that a correct assessment, Detective?
It was I think the most pragmatic approach based off what we were seeing. A lot of the cyber tips now are vetted to VICE and are to standing human trafficking task forces. They also receive these tips, and if it's a tip that is labeled or described as relatively urgent, they're moving on it fairly quickly.
All right. Thank you for that, Detective. I really appreciate it. I certainly have more questions in this area, but I recognize my colleagues do as well. So Commissioner Briggs, I'll turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Decker, for shining a light on this. Are there any other questions? Commissioner Soboroff, I see you have your mic open.
Yeah, I won't repeat what's been said, plus and minus, because I think it's very good, very healthy to get this out in the open and to transpire. We have a tsunami coming, and I just want to make sure we're prepared for it. And that is, not only do we have the Super Bowl, but we have the game 2 weeks before the Super Bowl. And I just want to make sure that all of these things are put in place for that, because what you're going to have is a 2 week stretch. It's not just going to be one day here and one day for the Super Bowl. Everything's going to be here for 2 solid weeks. So it's starting 2 weeks early. Point of information.
Thank you, Commissioner Soboroff. Commissioner Kalanche, do you have any questions?
Just thank you. Just a couple of brief questions. Thank you so much for your presentations. Very enlightening and also very important. I have a couple of questions just for my own kind of education. this might be a naive question, but how do you distinguish between prostitution and human trafficking? So when you're out there, like what would lead you to believe that one is human trafficking and the other one is prostitution? That's one of my questions. And then the second question is, if I'm understanding correctly, we had and there's a need for a vice unit that is specifically focused on the human trafficking or the human trafficking task force versus doing other vice work, right? Is that so? Those are my two questions, and I don't know if anybody wants to field them. Maybe the advocates can help me figure out what the difference is.
Mauro, do you want to take the first one?
Sure. So Commissioner Calanchi, so your question was regarding differentiating between prostitution and human trafficking.
Yeah,
So,
is it just children, or is there, I mean, what is your definition, I guess?
well, the
so I
crime
understand.
of human trafficking affects adults and minors.
Okay.
When the DAs are looking at our cases, they have a list of criteria regarding what charges are going to be applied to our subject, right? So our vice investigators or human trafficking investigators, they're fully prepared to break down a case. They're going to be doing their investigation. They're going to determine the age of the victim, the type of relationship they had with the suspect. Was there any kind of violence used? Was there any type of sexual abuse that occurred against the victim? They're gonna break down the relationship between the suspect and the victim. What kind of acts were being performed? What type of money was earned?
So really quick, so when you're out there, your vice units out there, is this determined afterwards, after you make the arrest, or is there something that would help someone like me distinguish what the difference is?
Well, the vice officers are out there in an undercover capacity. They're observing, commercial sex work activity. They'll see either the sex worker out there, on the boulevard waving down. Usually they're waving down, single male drivers, usually it's typical hours, early mornings, late nights, in a specific area where all that commercial sex work occurs. So they're observing that, and based off of those observations, then they make contact with either the commercial sex worker or even the sex client, the John, and they'll detain them. And based off of their interviews, they're either going to come up with a standard prostitution investigation. Let's say if the sex client picks up this commercial sex worker, they'll have a standard prostitution investigation. Or if in another scenario, potentially they'll have a lone male driver approach this victim or this commercial sex worker, have a conversation, maybe even pick her up and have a discussion. And let's say the vice officers detain them, believing it is a prostitution investigation, and they might actually have a commercial sex worker who's just been picked up by a new and potential trafficker. And so based off of the conversations that have occurred between that male and that female, let's just say, it's going to guide them towards, we have a pandering investigation / human trafficking investigation, or do we just have a prostitution investigation? And a prostitution investigation is typically a misdemeanor. A human trafficking investigation is always elevated up to a felony.
Okay. That doesn't really help me, but I'm sure that there's in the process. I trust that you guys know what you're doing.
Well, let me help. Let me add to this, because this is a very critical conversation.
Right.
Human trafficking. You have acts of prostitution. An act of prostitution is an
Right.
individual agreeing for compensation to engage in a sex act. All right. An individual may prostitute themselves and that person, or participate in an act of prostitution as a John or as a client, if you will. The department changed more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, began looking at the men and women, young and old, youth and adults, that engage in commercial sex trafficking as survivors and as victims, because the path there is one of coercion, force, and violence. It is the taking, it is stealing of individuals' and their conduct in prostituting themselves is not one of their own will. Now, that's not to say that there aren't individuals engaged in acts of prostitution, but the work of us with these providers here is to find and off-ramps and diversion and recover and save individuals who are being trafficked for the profit of another, for the purposes of a sex trade. But then we also have human trafficking for labor. So the trafficking aspect is somebody is essentially selling and profiting from the activities of another individual, and that's being commercialized and trafficked to a ready public in too many instances that's willing to buy or spend money to do that.
Got it. That's helpful. And then just thank you for that. Just to follow up. So I've been on the commission 1 year, and I do remember that first presentation where we were discussing, the impacts of the cuts on the task force. So I'm wondering what ideally what we would need is dedicated vice detectives or officers to focus their efforts just on this issue versus all the different issues that they tackle. That's what I'm understanding, right?
About 100 personnel.
100 personnel. Wow.
The vice units across the city were downsized over the last 5 years as an effort to marshal resources, to marshal them and keep them in a uniform deployment. Average vice unit was reduced by 2 to 4 people. There's 21 of those units. Human trafficking task forces all should have 10 to 15 people. And then the DSVD would need a similar number. And so in an ideal world, rebuilding to that type of capacity is something that we would endeavor for.
And that would be the 100 personnel. Or the 100?
Yes.
Okay.
And I want to be fair to our elected leaders and officials in very tough times. When you look at the resources set aside by the Los Angeles Police Department on this critical function, we far outpace our Sheriff's Department and many other agencies across this region. So it is not it's not a prioritization that we're being drafted by other agencies. Most other agencies have no set specialized resources for this very important work.
Can I ask a quick question, Chief? And then I'll stop. This is a little bit separate, but I think for me and my brain, it connects. What percentage of time do our vice officers spend on ABC violations?
A minor amount. They'll spend time on an ABC location, alcohol beverage control, that is a center for violent crime or other persistent problems such as prostitution in the neighborhood. And primarily, for instance, we have investigations on a center that is an adult entertainment location. It's an ABC location. It's been a center for repeated shooting and death and other serious injuries. And so they'll conduct those undercover investigations in order to go after that license, if you will, because the violation is that they're operating in an improper fashion, or allowing the underlying violent conditions to exist, so that they remove that license, or that person loses that license, and therefore that business goes away.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was a significant amount of time, how we can advocate to get some money, additional funding from the state, since they issue the ABC licenses. Just thinking. No,
it's a good thinking. And I met with ABC state level representatives this past Tuesday when we had our one of a series of Super Bowl preparations, and implored them to deploy as many alcohol and beverage control investigators as possible to this region, because we know that those bars and taverns are going to be hotspots for matters of public safety. And so we're asking that responsibly, that all state agencies and all public safety agencies lean together in this shared responsibility.
And just to follow up on that, kind of on the same kind of topic, do you know, and you can report this back at some other time, but do you know if we're accessing any federal dollars for human trafficking work?
You have a grant before you today that is just under $1 million. And it is an ongoing, we are fortunate that we petition and are recipients. I think, frankly, the work of our people in concert with the collaboration with our community-based organizations is why we are a beneficiary of those grants.
I would still look into the state, which is because of there is some money in the state. So maybe that would be something that we should talk to some of our state elected representatives. This is such an important issue. That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you
Kalanchi.
for your time and thank you for all the work that you do out there.
Commissioner Bonner, did you have any questions? I'd like to thank all of you, Chief Pitcher, Chief Hamilton, Chief Woodard, Detective Gallegos, and Lieutenant Evans, as well as you, Mr. Cox, Mr. Smith, and last but not least, Ms. Thornton. Thank you for bringing to life and in vivid detail not only your experiences, both having been a victim, but also now being an advocate for change and helping to illuminate for many of us what this crime actually is. As I understand it, human trafficking, can begin with a child who is enticed through the internet now, because that's what's happening. And not only are they enticed to partake in something that is going to harm them both psychologically, physically, and mentally and emotionally for the rest of their lives, but also it can lead to drug use. It can lead to aggravated assault. It could lead to their young bodies being left on the roadside, as we recently saw. And so this is not, as I view it, a simple crime of human trafficking, since it covers a host of sins that cover the range of bad deeds by people and that are happening in our own city. And so, Chief, I really thank Commissioner Kalanchi and you for highlighting what we need in this area, the resources that we need to bring to bear in this area, because this is no less harmful to the city of Los Angeles than the murders that we see each week. And so I would urge our elected officials to pour resources into our department to help fight this. And I would urge the citizens of Los Angeles to pour resources into the Saving Innocence Project, Zoe International, and Journey Out, because help is needed not only from the department, but from the community organizations that are assisting us. I want to thank all of you for being here today and for putting on an amazing presentation. I believe Commissioner Decker wanted to say something before we go to the next topic.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Briggs. Last year, we wrote a letter to the City Council highlighting the details of the information that was provided to us most compellingly by the advocacy groups, the groups that are helping victims each and every day. I propose, Commissioner Briggs, that we write a similar letter this year. I'm told that last year's letter assisted in helping restore at least some of the funding and provide the services. And I'm hopeful this year it will have the same impact, with the goal of restoring all funding for all 100 positions. And so I propose that we as a commission draft that letter to the City Council, and I of course would be willing to assist in the drafting of that.
If that is a motion, Commissioner Decker, I second it. I would ask whether or not all the commissioners are in favor of that motion.
I vote yes.
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 Commissioner Sobroff? Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you, Commissioner Decker, for that. And thank all of you once again. I appreciate it. Thank you.